Hi, everyone, and welcome to our class session for today. I apologize that this cannot be our live synchronous class together, which means we're going to have to cut out a few of the activities and break out lessons for the, I guess, research module, but you're not going to miss out on too much. I did send a strongly worded email on behalf of the changing of my schedule, but I realized with how much time that they're going to need to change a lot of tile floors, that it was going to be impossible to have a live session tomorrow and still meet with you all. So I decided it would be easier to record here today. Now, if you want to know something funny, my microphone decided during the first recording to cut out and stop working. And so I already have done this one time already. And so what you're going to get is the second time, in which I'm going to give that same amount of enthusiasm that I'm telling myself that I'm going to do again, because I sat there for 30 minutes and then realized that my microphone was off and just like had a moment where I was staring at a screen, just like, I am not good at this. Also, I am so used to teaching at like early mornings and early afternoons that doing this in the evening is really throwing me off right now. This is a time where I'm starting to like kind of like debrief for the day, chill a little bit, go over all of the things that I did and make a plan for tomorrow, or go to the gym, which would be the other thing I'd be doing right now. But I am not, so I might be a little bit off today, and I apologize for that. But without further ado, I'm going to just jump into this. It's going to be a little bit longer than usual, but there's a lot of information in here that I think is pretty good for the most part. And so let us jump over to screen share two. Okay, so the kind of lecture, or at least the conversation we're going to be having today, is about doing research for the most part. I have given this lecture in many different institutions with many different groups of people with crazy different disparate age ranges. And it is one of my favorite lectures, but it's also one of the toughest to give, mainly because doing research is a highly technical skill that you need to practice a lot to really be good at. When I first started doing research for, say, even my undergraduate debate team, or even like late high school, I was awful at it. It would take me for a 20-page paper up to like 2 to 3 hours to find a couple citations. Now it takes me about 3 minutes total. And a lot of that is just like learning, failing, getting better along those processes. And so I'm going to give you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way to see if that can help you out. And if it doesn't, I apologize. But so far for me, it's been pretty effective for the most parts. And so the first thing we always have to do whenever we start off along the ways of talking about research is we're going to type in do a barrel roll. Whoa. For those of you that grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s like me, and you played a lot of Star Fox 64, do a barrel roll is a slogan that brings up a lot of nostalgia and gets kicked into your head a lot of times. And if you're also like me, it cost you a couple friendships because you were way better than all your friends at Star Fox and they all wanted to play you in the terrible multiplayer mode, which you spent way too much time playing. It's crazy at how many time sinks that exist in our lives that are very meaningless that we fall into. But anyway, the reason I show you the do a barrel roll is that there's a lot of ways in which we can approach different engines to try to get different results that we want that we might not even know about in the first place. We might not know that that command leads to doing a barrel roll. And so what kind of barrel rolls can we make our research do for us is kind of going to be the goal or the important focus of what it is we do here today. And so we remember back to Marshall McLuhan that the medium is the message, and the ways in which we have gone from categorizing knowledge from the spoken word to the written word to the compartmentalized version of the written word known as like articles that we've seen today, through narratives, through just purely scientific data, through different forms of analyses. And we have a glut of information at our hands. How does that modify us in our daily behavior? Well, for instance, I no longer have to remember or memorize a ton of information that is on the more useless or not as helpful side of the scope, because I can know what tomorrow's weather is going to be by looking at my phone and Googling it within the process of like 3 to 5 seconds. I know what's happening in the world whenever I look at the news almost instantly and can see a plethora of sources all looking at divergent views on a singularized subject of something something that is happening currently in existence. And so, what does that do for us as individuals is something you can also pontificate in the background of your head of how does that change our daily life? How does that change the way in we interact with other people or even interact with information and knowledge itself? Is something we're kind of going to be discussing today. Here's a brief anecdote. When I was an undergraduate, I had, I believe, on my Monday, Wednesday of classes, which were my busy days, I had to take 22 books around with me. And a large part of it was my fault for not scheduling a little bit better and not having a large chunk of my intellectual labor happen on 2 days during the week. But the other part was ebooks and digital books, which most of you are probably accessing the book for this class as a digital book, were not really a thing. And so you don't necessarily have that same sort of relationship to all of these large chunks of text that you would have to bring with you through textbook form from class to place in the ways in which we interact with the world and do it now. Okay, so the first fragment of a book that we know about is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is approximately about 4,000 years ago. The reason I bring this up is because that is a large kind of chunk of human time in which we have been producing and categorizing both narratives and stories, but also information for other people to go back and research and look for. There is a reason why the cliche of standing on the shoulder of giants exists in the first place. And that is because in a lot of ways, there is so much glut of information for you to utilize that it can almost become paralyzing at different points in times because there's just so much said already. Now, the great thing for you is that as an academic and as a scholar of whatever it is you're doing, most of good information comes from being able to do research on past things other people have said and be able to explore it in a new contemporary light or contemporary context. And so a lot of the hard intellectual labor is already done on your behalf. And a lot of it's just exploring the analysis and kind of the ingenium or the thing that it is that brings two divergent ideas together to create some sort of newness of an idea or concept of a thing that it is that you are looking for or kind of want to analyze or see. I always find it fun to look at criticisms of the actual written word because a lot of the criticisms of the written word are the exact same criticisms we have today of a cell phone. You probably can't see me holding up my cell phone right now, so I don't know why I'm doing that. Make sure. Okay. The criticisms of the written word were it would end the oral tradition as we knew it. We would no longer come together to tell stories, have those moments where we share knowledge together. We would stop talking to one another because everyone would just be going to write their books and read their books. It would hurt our ability to have memory because we wouldn't need to memorize all of the cultural narratives and traditions that we had. Instead, we can just write them down and pass it on that way. And most individuals indicated that it would change all of the customs and traditions we hold dear today. This probably sounds very similar to you in the way in which other individuals criticize people's usage of phones and different new technologies. But it goes to show that a lot of the criticisms we have of contemporary technologies are just rehashed criticisms we've had of older technologies in the past. What that goes to show is that probably when we come up with a new kind of technology to do research and communication that becomes the accepted norm or standardized norm, most people are going to have the exact same criticisms of that expected or standardized norm going into the future. So that's probably a good way to look at something if you're saying, okay, everyone is looking at VR and they're being like, this removes humans from the equation. Well, there's a probably high probability that that's the next step that occurs. And so I wanted to show you really briefly the kind of computers I used to use whenever I was logging on through my 56K internet to talk to my friends after school, kicking everyone off of the phone, known as computer. And I believe that the Yip Yips show this example perfectly. So I have to have on music when I do my kind of lectures and conversations so my microphone doesn't cut off. The problem is I didn't do it last time, and that's why I'm now re-recording this. But I am going to show you this Yip Yip video because it's adorable. And I need to make sure I am sharing the sound, which I will stop doing afterwards. So if you ever wonder why I'm so weird, this is
why. Look book. Yep. Computer. Computer, 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 yep, 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 yep,
Computer,
yep,
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 yep, yep, yep, yep, uh-huh, uh-huh. Oh, oh, hmm, oh. Look, look,
Book,
book,
book, look, book,
look,
look,
book,
book,
look, book,
look,
book,
book,
book, book,
look,
book.
book. Oh,
Huh?
buttons,
Oh,
buttons, buttons,
button,
buttons, buttons,
but,
buttons, yep, 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 yep.
Okay, so if all of you are thinking to yourself, why are all of my younger professors absolutely insane? That is because our education was actually an acid trip. That is the thing that we grew up on that was like, hey, here's how you should learn about computers. Thank you all for that. Whoever thought that that educational scheme was going to be a good idea. All right. All right. Yips, go away. Okay. There we go. All right. So up next is let's go from Memex to the World Wide Web. On the right is just an old, outdated joke with Al Gore, which was always the funny joke. Well, it wasn't actually that funny of a joke. That he invented the internet, which he did not do. But the Memex is something that we should talk about a little bit briefly as an older technology, which led to the foundational kind of conceptual ideas of the computer in its modern day that we come to understand of it. And it was created by an individual named Vannevar Bush, who was the lead scientist during the Manhattan Project, that in his book, The Way We Think, figured out that there was a process that we could use to categorize information and categorize knowledge for the most part, and that we could send codes back and forth really quickly. And also simultaneously, DARPA, which is the United States' secret military branch towards the development and creation of new technologies and mainly new weapons, but also partially communication technologies, pretty much created the internet so that they could send codes across the Atlantic, which were done through large wires that pretty much spanned throughout most of the Earth. Now, why these things are also important for us to think about is whenever there's a new technology that is created in the field of communication, it almost and this is kind of depressing, it almost is always equated to a new technology that leads to war for the most part, at least here in the United States. And so there's a lot of violence that goes into the creation of new technological innovations in a lot of manners. That is just something that we don't want to sweep under the table, but at least to acknowledge where a lot of cool new things come from when we get those cool new things in the first place. And so let's look at some brief benefits and disadvantages of a computational based approach to doing information. The first is going to be flexibility. You can research from your bed, you can research from hanging out with your friends, you can research while you're sitting there listening to your grandmother tell you the same story she's told you 36 times in a row. You can be on your phone quickly doing research. You have that flexibility to always be doing something. The second is that there's repeatability. And so if we're good scientific advocates of the scientific method of being able to repeat kind of tasks to make sure that we can verify and validate their kind of authenticity or objectivity, we can do that easier when we have that computational based approach that lets us rerun a simulation or rerun the thing it is we are doing to find that same or similar result. The third is instantaneous access. Regardless of where you are at, you are almost always able to find access to the internet to be able to do the research that it is you are looking for. Now, with that said, what I just said was a very kind of classist kind of assumption because there's a lot of places that don't have access to the internet, and it can be one of those things that we can easily take for granted whenever we kind of analyze and think about. The next thing is going to be a list of add-ons. We have a bunch of browser-based kind of computational things we can utilize to make our studying or at least our analysis of things a lot easier. And there's tons of features and way easier modes of access. Now, cons, there's way too much information. I am forgetting the scholar's name. Give me 2 seconds. Uh, I'm not going to get her name right now. But about 6 years ago, there was a research article that indicated how much information that actually exists in the way in which it kind of denigrates our ability to go out and find information because we just see too many things being said by too many subject positions at different points in times. There can be just too much information for us to really be able to say that we are good enough to do our research or we have researched enough. If you're like me, for instance, and you always always want to know more and make sure you know the totality of it. You can't do that in a computational based approach. You are going to not only read a book when be done like you would if you were at the library, you would be able to read infinite amounts of books, mostly on the subject matter in which you are looking for in the first place. Second is that the internet is endless, and this is kind of combined with easy distractions. It's really easy to go onto a YouTube channel and then somehow it's like 4 in the morning and you're watching a video of like some person sitting in a park and a bear walks up beside him. And then you think to yourself, I have been on the internet a little too long today. And so these easy distractions, this endlessness of being able to search and click and use that jouissance of the hyperlink to always get that kind of short kind of like adrenaline rush of clicking something new, kind of like the same reason the slot machines and casinos are set up the way they are to always get you clicking and always get you taking short actions for that brief kind of reprieve, is can be very bad if you're trying to set a goal and get something done, particularly when you have your phone beside you and you get a Facebook message, which everyone should just delete their Facebooks anyway, or you get like an Instagram something or a TikTok that's just like blowing up your spot. It can be very easy to fall into other things around you and not stay on the task it is that you have on hand. Also, the digital glow is probably bad for your eyes and will wake you up and probably be bad for your sleep habits. In general, I'm not going to cover the last of the cons because there's just a bunch of big academic words for no reason because we're academics and we like to use big words for no reason. All right. So an R1 research university, which by the way is what the University of Maryland is, and so if I were you, I would 100% put on my resume that I've been trained in effective research habits. Now, will that necessarily happen? I don't know if that'll be the case throughout your collegiate career, but you can totally put that you have been in a research intensive atmosphere and field, which I know a lot of employers look for. They look for good comm skills, they look for good research skills, and these are all the things that you can potentially sell to other people when you sell yourself to other people through this. In 1998, the Boyer Commission came together and said, we as scholars aren't putting together a good curriculum that teaches undergraduates how to do effective research habits and tactics, and employers are getting very upset because their people just don't know how to find things in the digital age, in the digital world. And so being able to know that you are a strong research subject is good for both selling yourself as a potential person to get a job in the future, and is also probably one of the things you might not have known about the University of Maryland before you went here. So let's think about effective habits that you can have when doing research. First thing we need to think of is space. There is a book that came out about 10 years ago that identified that like 60% of all MIT profit generating ideas all happened in one room of one building. And there's a lot of different theories that come up with how the conceptualization of the space in which you operate and work in can be very conducive to how you kind of function as a person or how a person functions in the first place. For instance, you don't want to do research lying down. You don't want to try to learn while sitting in bed. Research is one of those things that is an active process that you need to be engaged in as you are doing it. If you want to maximize the most amount of output you as a person can do in the space that it is that you are doing in. So that's why it's very also important for us to think about the spaces we are working in around us. And I know it can be a lot of hard for a lot of you that are stuck at home, for instance, when you have a bunch of noise happening around you to really focus and hone in on the thing that it is you're doing. The first thing I always tell people whenever they're going to do effective research is find the space that works best for you. When I was in the process of my dissertation, got no writing done in the city of Pittsburgh. There was too much noise. I am from rural areas. I am used to walking outside, and the craziest thing I hear are birds chirping with the occasional car going by, or maybe a neighbor making some noise for the most part. When I was there, instead, I would hear like jackhammers, cars all the time, and that was just not conducive for me as an individual to promote the best kind of research and promote the best kind of analysis and writing that I was doing. So finding where your body functions best is going to be very important for you to continually be the best version of you that you can be. Okay, the other requirements are going to be a need and desire, and these are just philosophically driven. If you want to research something, you are going to find one, more enjoyment in it while you do the process, and two, it's going to also make the time go quicker whenever you're getting something done. If there's something you're dreading doing, like research for this stupid informative speech, oh my God, I hate Aaron so much. Why is he making me do this? If you have that approach when you go to the subject of whatever it is you're doing, which is also why I let you pick whatever topic you want to pick, you're not going to have as good of a speech. You're not going to do the research as well, and you're not going to be as invested into it as you can be. The second's going to be time, which we need to start thinking about as a sort of strategic resource for what it is we are using. So how much time do we have in a week to get this project done? So we have approximately like a weekish to two to get our informative speech ready to roll for the most part. And so how many hours are we going to need to set aside for us to do research in a given moment, time, and place? And that is always going to be a finite thing. Even life itself, we all have a finite expiration date, is a thing. And so maximizing that time efficacy is also important for us so that we don't waste or misuse a lot of that time that could be going to other effective things, or maybe more enjoyment things, or maybe just not doing the stupid informative speech things that we want to be doing, even if we don't actually want to be doing those speech things. And so trying to conceptualize our time as that resource will be important for us moving forward. The third thing is going to be planning. We can ask ourselves, do we want to take breaks while we do research? So for me, the Pomodorian method, a 15-minute writing session or 15-minute research session, 5-minute break, repeat that process is a very good process that works for me to get a large chunk of research done and stay focused and stay tuned while giving myself reasonable breaks. Before I came upon that method, what I would do is pretty much just sit down and just research for like 8 hours straight without any breaks, and then just go crash, or research for like 16 hours straight without any breaks and then go crash, which is not as healthy, not as sustainable, not as good not as good for me as a 30-year-old versus me doing it as a 20-year-old, or the all-nighter that you may take. And also know how much time you're going to be willing to commit to the project at hand. So remember, we have to turn this informative speech into an actual speech product at some point in the near future. So we need to know, how much do we want to really work on that project? How much time do we have to really read an entirety of an article versus do we need to skim these articles to find the specific citation that we want to find so that we may utilize it in a very quick method, is something that you should know before you go into what it is you are researching. Because the most insidious, and I mean insidious, use of your time is a form of procrastination in which you sit there and you read the entirety of a freaking book, and then realize there's no good quotes that come out of that book, and you're just like, well, at least I did something. Well, what you did was not really helpful to your overall goal, which is why we always need to develop kind of those individualized research plans as we go in to take those actions in the first place. And the last is, be honest with yourself. How much am I going to put effort wise into this informative speech that I am doing? And how much do I assume I want a best speech I've ever written, and how much is that going to impact my grade, are all kind of internalized discussions you need to have with yourself before you sit down and do research, so that you can effectively, clearly come out and conceptualize and answer all of these planning questions to get everything done that you need to get done to the best of your abilities. All right, these are just a list of my add-ons that I particularly use. I'm not really going to go over them here just to save some time, but if you want to use any of these are the ones that are always popping up in my like Google Chrome's feed for the most part. My favorite is probably easy notifications for Google Docs whenever I'm co-pubbing something with somebody. Particularly, this will be helpful for your group projects or working with somebody else. Knowing what they modified and when they modified it, and getting that kind of notification on my like just random Google screen is helpful for me to go check in if you're like me and like to see everything that works in the ways it works. So here's another list of things you can do. So if you wanted to find a specific phrase, or like, this is also good if you're like trying to find a specific song lyric or song, is if you throw things in quotation marks, it will restrict all of the analysis that you have for the most part, and just give you hit results with those words verbatim, and it will not change or modify anything that you have. If you use a hyphen, it gets rid of the vagueness of the search that you are using. And so if you wanted to say, I want a Mustang minus horse, it's going to just show you pictures of the car Mustang and not the horse Mustang for the most part. A colon is good if you're trying to look at a specific site. So if you wanted to search CNN for the usage of the word Trump in like a Google search engine, you could use a colon to be like, hey, cite CNN Trump. The next step is going to be a hyperlink finder if you were just trying to find kind of where a certain hyperlink or something has been used as a citation in the past. Maybe you're looking at a blog that I wrote, for instance, like 6 years ago, and you're like, okay, I want to see how many times it's been cited somewhere else. You can always use the hyperlink finder as the link colon mark. The asterisk is always going to be the wild card for a word you don't necessarily remember. So if you wanted to use those quotations to find something specific and you don't know the full totality of the quote, but you know most of it and just not the last word, the asterisk works to say, okay, this last word can be modified and used in different formats. Related just finds websites that are similar to one another. Maybe you don't want to use Amazon anymore and want to use a competitor. Maybe you use a related website, or maybe you wanted to get rid of all the Fox News hits. You would say it's related to this article that I found or this place that I find it. And the last thing I always want to say whenever we're doing specific Googling of things is always refine your search terms to find the most accurate term for the situation you're using. Another thing is that term of arts do exist. And so when something's been written about or at least talked about in a lot of ways, the language in which people utilize things, and I'm replugging in my headset so it doesn't die because I really don't want to re-record this again. A lot of the ways in which, oh no, I've made a huge mistake. Not that bad of a mistake. I just tangled up a bunch of cords around the cord that's connected to my headset, and I apologize. Okay. A lot of the words that get developed over the course of time whenever research happens are a lot of term of arts that people will use in their own work and research. And so figuring out what those term of arts are or figuring out what that specific nuance in the language is very important for us to find those refined searches of what it is we are looking for. And I know that's very vague to say, and you'll notice it whenever you're searching in whatever topic area it is you are searching for in the first place. And so if you're looking at making a political speech, and then you might want to know the word zero sum, for instance, that might be a key word that usually gets utilized in the context of maybe a geopolitical rivalry or a political kind of like capital type situation in which politicians might be only able to do so many actions of agencies, are going to be key words that get continually used by a lot of different think tanks and a lot of different individuals that you might not necessarily think to use the first time you do it. And so the next tip I have is just make sure you're paying attention to the language, and specific re-instances or reiterations of words are going to be very helpful for you to cut out a lot of that time of searching for the thing it is that you are trying to search for in the first place. Below is a link to the library library. I will tell you the two things I use most. The first is going to be the Google Scholar. The reason I use it, particularly if you're on campus or logged into your university ID, it tells you what your university has access to while using the Google search engine, which is usually, in my opinion, superior to the UMD search engine for the most part, in its analysis and finding the things that you want. It's also the thing I'm most familiar with, which is why I typically use it more than other ones. And if you want to use it, let me just pop to Google Scholar real quick. I can show you a few things. All right, so say I wanted to look at COVID transmission. It's going to tell me all of the things that I have direct access to based upon what I am logged into at the time, or anything that is free, just generally speaking, here on the right, based upon wherever I have it. What are important for us to note is make sure you utilize the custom ranges. So I really only want to hear about COVID from 2020. To 2021, because anything beforehand is not going to be as helpful if they're talking about a different variant of COVID. That is not something that we are worrying about here today for the most part, or at least my research analysis or method. And so I find the one that I want to find, and it's going to give me an article that I can contend and utilize with in the future. If I'm going to use the UMD website, for instance, the way in which I utilize this for the most part is the databases, and I look for specific databases most of the time because it's going to be more helpful helpful for me to say, look at particularly journals and do a journal analysis of what is being accepted into those journals to see the kind of ways in which knowledge or research is gleaned or leaning in your field. If you're like a biology major and you want to be published in a major biology journal, what I highly recommend doing is going to the database finder, find the key journals in whatever field it is that you work in the first place, and kind of figure out what gets published or what's at the forefront or at least the cutting edge of analysis, so that you can kind of get a step ahead of where people are going with research trends and research ideas for the most part. And this is a good way if you just really want to learn about fields, just go see what they talk about. And if you're interested in those things that they're talking about, it can also help you decide what major you want to take, or at least what major you want to do in the first place. All right, here's some ways in which you can bend the rules to give yourself a little bit of leeway whenever you're doing heavy research kind of assignments. The first is on Wikipedia at the very bottom. Everyone says don't cite Wikipedia. They're right, don't cite Wikipedia. But at the bottom of every Wikipedia entry, there's usually about 300 citations that I even utilize sometimes when I'm looking for more citations in the future, that you can then utilize as your own citations moving forward and just be like, okay, here's some citations that are on the same subject matter. I did not find these personally, but someone else found them for me. And you don't have to cite other people that have had other citations. Now, you don't want to copy it verbatim, but if there's like a couple citations in there that are good, make sure you utilize them. So if you have a 20-page paper due and it needs 20 citations, you can easily find a lot of those citations further and moving forward. The second is going to be secondary sources on peer-reviewed articles. Usually what scholars do is if they don't have space for an idea, but they let an article kind of influence their thought process or what they're doing, they'll include a secondary sources section at the very bottom of the citations, which you can go look at and be like, okay, here's a bunch of other scholarly articles that I can now utilize for my own self. The third thing that I always recommend everybody who is a freshman to everybody that's even a senior is create a database for yourself of all of the citations that you have created over time. You will be so surprised that once you find kind of an academic thing, you will continually and repeatedly reuse that academic thing in the future. Don't be like me and have to recite Zizek 13 times because you want to talk about psychoanalytical critiques of capitalism, blah, 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 in a TV show. But then you're like, oh, shit, I got to go back and recite this and waste another 20 to 30 minutes of time. Trust me, make your databases for yourself. And you can use one in Microsoft Word, for instance. There's a way in which you can save all of the citations you create for the Word document in Word. Here, let me actually up over here and open up Word really fast. And show you in the review section, there should be where am I? Oh, it's usually in the references. Yeah, in here, you can always manage your sources, create your own sources. I do not use this one, but you can just insert your own citations, and it will just ask you a few questions in which you just put in the information. And the beautiful thing about it is whenever you're done, it's going to save all of those in whatever style you're using. You can just hit the bib button, and it'll slap the bib on for you on the back without you doing any more additional work, which is always why I tell people to just use Word, particularly because it's not the best. Like there will be some typos and some problems eventually, but if you're not going to be like a professional writer, I would not super worry about it, and it will do a lot of the labor that it is that you are trying to get done in the first place. All right, so what qualifies as a good source? Normally would do a breakout session on this and I'd give everyone their own sources. A lot of it is your audience specific. So if you ever cited something to Wikipedia from me, I would be like, yeah, that's not really a good source. If you cited it for somebody else, they might say that that's a good source of information of where it came from. If you cite something from CNN or Fox News to me, I'm gonna be like, that's a meh source. Like it's not bad, it's not good though, because it's certainly going to be biased in the way it's presenting and telling information that it is telling the information, or whatever newspaper it is you're utilizing is going to be an all right source for the most part, but it's always going to be contingent upon your audience member. And so I'm left leaning for the most part. When I hear things from Fox News, I'm like, okay, that is going to be a way in which you interpret and imagine the world that is not necessarily my own. And so I'm always hesitant to hear it for the most part. The peer-reviewed journal is just a journal or an article that is being written. It usually gets signed off on by a few of your peers to say, hey, this person person works in the field and it's good information for the most part. When I was back on the database section at UMD, almost like 95% of those journals are always going to be peer reviewed. What you do is you finish your journal article, you send it off to your peers all read it blindly. You don't know which one of your peers are reading it, so you can't kind of stack the deck in your favor. Now, technically you can stack the deck in your favor because if you're in the field, you'll generally know who the peer reviewers are. It's a really dumb system that's very gerrymandered to produce very dumb kinds of knowledge. But that is a different conversation that I really don't want to get into right now. But beyond that, is your peers will sign off on it and say, okay, that this is good. This can be kind of in the conversation of work. Next up are books academic publishers. They are ones that do use a peer review system, which means that not all books can get published. A commercial publisher, on the other hand, is a publisher that will publish functionally anything, which is why whenever you're reading a book, check out who is publishing it, because for instance, one of the books in which I'm on the editorial board for, there was a guy that came in that wanted to sell the book to the overarching author of the book. And this guy that came in was like the most Miami Vice guy you've ever met. He started off a big speech. He was like, orange is the new black, black's the new green, green's the new yellow, and had this like 45-minute presentation on like wanting to buy and sell the book. And he was just like, I don't really care what's in it. And it was really funny because my advisor at the time period was just like, no, after like the first 5 minutes. And watching this man's soul break was, I don't know. I'm too pessimistic of a person. But beyond that, be wary of commercial publishers. Next up are YouTube videos. They can be citations now. There's approved formats for most of the APA, MLA, Chicago styles that utilize YouTube videos, and they can be relevant. And so remember, it's audience specific and also topic specific of what you are trying to cite when you are trying to cite it. And things like tabloid and hearsay from friends can also be cited in different ways. And so knowing what is a good source is also back to what we talked about last week. Being good with citations is also being good at audience analysis and knowing what the range of acceptability is based upon where it is and where we're finding sources. Plagiarism. Don't take other people's ideas or thoughts without giving them proper credit. Don't modify the way in which a sentence is structured to be like, no, it's my sentence. You can't do that. That is literally stealing plus putting in an extra word. And so make sure that your ideas are your own, or you're giving proper citational credit to the person that came up with the original idea. That is why I think it is very silly for anyone to ever plagiarize, because at the end of the day, as long as you slap a citation onto it, you are not plagiarizing for the most part. Now, that does mean you need to do a little extra labor, and it's not even hard labor. It's just a little extra labor to say, here's my analysis of things that other people said. And so that is why I highly recommend you don't do it, particularly because there will be school responses to it. I'm going to skip out on the big industry of the research machine. It is absurd. It is one of the things that if you actually knew about it, you would be very furious about it, because in a large way, it's part of the reason why your tuition is so high, because you have access to all of these journals that you don't want in the first place, that you are paying for through your tuition for the most part. And also, these journals take, say, my master's thesis was given to them for free through my university, which they are now selling to other people through their own research journals back to institutions, which undergraduates then need to buy. And I no longer own the rights to anything that I write that get produced through them, which I am not seeing any money for, which is why it is kind of the world's worst system that has ever existed in the first place. But people don't actually talk about it, so I'm not going to go on a large rant about it. It is just as insidious as the book industry, which you all know is a bunch of bullshit you deal with on an everyday basis already. Now we're going to talk about how to read. I promise this is the last thing we're going to do, and then we will wrap it up. Okay. Very briefly, if I was to say need to read an article, but I don't have a lot of time, generally speaking, what I do is I go to the intro of the article, bop down to the conclusion, read these two things, usually the last two sections of the kind of article, or at least the discussion part of the article, or the conclusion, whatever the terminology is going to be field specific. And when I'm in those things, that is going to tell me enough information about what is going to be in the rest of the article that I can then ask myself the question, do I want to spend more time in this article? The thing that it is that I'm looking for might actually be in those sections, and you can just call it a win because usually people act a little bit more grandiose and verbose in the introduction and in the conclusion sections. But if there's not the thing you're specifically looking for, but you can guess is in here, that is going to be good enough to say, all right, now I can actually utilize this article, or it'll tell you to just skip it and move on. The usually you can also read the abstracts of an article to really learn more information about it very quickly, so that you can quickly peruse kind of this glut or overwhelming capacity of information that we have. But say you wanted to read the entirety of the article, what you might do instead is whenever you get to a paragraph, and this is true for both academic books as well as academic articles, the first section or first sentence of every paragraph is going to tell you what's in the rest of the paragraph. And that is a way for you to say that, okay, I know what we're going to talk about right here is the study included 105 index patients. Okay, so what we're going to do is a lot of demographic analysis and figure out what is happening into those patients in this paragraph section. I don't need to read the rest of this. If I have a class and they're like, all right, tell me what happened in this paragraph, based upon the first sentence, I can probably guess or at least intuit what's going to be in there. So if you have to read an entire book for a class, this is the easiest way to get around it if you don't have a lot of time to actually read the entirety of the book. Because if you listen to me and you had smart planning and you were like, shit, I don't have enough time for this, you would be able to say, okay, I know I can just skim on some of the top conversations of each of the sections to get a general grasp of what's going on and a better understanding of what's happening. And finally, make sure you always utilize kind of what they're referencing. And if you ever need more citations, be free to go look at the things that other people are talking about in the same field, in the same area, because that's the easiest way to get more citations for whatever it is you're doing. Now, don't directly use the same citations they're using for the most part, although you can do that. But what you can do is go there and find more information and more kind of better understanding of what's happening in those worlds to kind of give yourself a competitive and strategic edge. And so with that said, that is my, not the world's briefest lecture, but somewhat brief, condensed lecture of how to do some basic research. Most of it's going to come to you sitting in front of a computer screen or you sitting in the library and just practicing and finding your best habits and tactics. But think of kind of some of the things that I talked about or at least said today to put yourself into a better advantage or a better location so that you may be more successful moving forward. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope you're having a phenomenal week. See you Friday if you can make it.